Hold on, my neighbor's coming down the stairs. I don't want it to. I'll just wait 2 seconds
Okay.
in case I start talking.
Flurry day-to-day, Mata game-time decision.
Jeez. All right, I'm gonna do it. The moment we've been waiting patiently for all year is finally upon us. The NHL playoffs are set to begin. And Pat, I don't know about you, but I'm quite excited.
This is the greatest time of the year, isn't it? We're still, a few hours away from the first series getting kicked off on Wednesday night. But at the same point, once it gets going, it's what is it, 40 straight days of nonstop intense action with everything on the line, with the greatest trophy in sports up for grabs, Dave. And then this year, there's a lot to like, Dave, because everybody I speak with and everybody I talk to, and even just watching, we all are going to fill out our brackets in the coming days and the coming hours. I guess we don't have that much time to fill out our bracket, but Dave, it seems really up for grabs, doesn't it?
It does. It really feels like, I mean, maybe save for a couple teams that anyone can make a run at it. We're going to go through all the series. We're even going to start off with a little bit of some of the non-playoff coach firings and stuff, but this is Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. We're going to make some picks.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's start with all the nonsense that we have to talk about. First off, Dave Cameron being fired Tuesday morning, just a couple hours, just like a few hours or a day or so after Brian Murray announced he would not be returning. Brian Murray obviously has been sick. He's had cancer and has been in and out. It's been tough. It's interesting, Dave, because I heard Eugene Melnick on TSN a few weeks ago, and he was, James Duthie kind of pressed him about, would Brian Murray be back? Would Dave Cameron be back? Those guys have a long relationship. And I think once Eugene Melnick was very loyal to Brian Murray, and when Murray announced he was not coming back, he was not well enough, not of strength enough to come back. I think that was the first domino, and that kind of started that whole thing because he had his structure in place, and I don't think he wanted to hamstring a new GM. But then you see the others. Basically, they cleaned house, and we talked off air about this a little bit. But Dave, Paul McLean came in, and now he's gone. And then Dave Cameron came in, and now he's gone. And Dave, this is going to be what, the third coach in a little over 2 years, and that's a problem.
Yeah, it is. It almost feels like they're moving laterally sometimes, and that they, even with the moves they've made, that this team just isn't really improving. And they had all, the rookies a couple years ago, Stone and all that. And I even was kind of high on them earlier in the year. That I thought that if they could get something out of their back end and goaltending, that they have the offensive talent to do it. But I think it kind of shows that they've plateaued. And as much as I don't know if firing Cameron, I guess it makes sense because Murray left. But, they're going to have to hit the reset button again here. And I don't know if they're going to try to tear it down to build it back up, or they're going to try to build it with what they have. But they've got a long way to go.
It's pretty remarkable because Dave Cameron came in and they went on that incredible run last season and to the playoffs and the Hamburglar and captured everyone's emotions and excitement. And they pressed Montreal in that first round series, and Carey Price was obviously the difference in that postseason series. But they have a lot of good. I mean, Mark Stone had another really good year. Mike Hoffman had a pretty good year. I mean, it's just like you said, they couldn't keep the puck out of the back of their net, and it was more the defensive breakdowns. It seems like, and I guess that all falls on the head coach at some point to not be able to make the change. But you have to kind of think that they were never as good as that run they were on last season, and you can't think that they were as bad as they were on this thing this season. But Dave, we talked about it, and you said it. Whether it's plateauing, whether it's hitting the reset button, it's really crazy to me because, the Senators, they did not a lot changed from last year to this year in terms of them. They made the big trade with Phaneuf, and that was an obvious mistake. But you just wonder where they go because if not for that impressive, I mean they were a playoff team the lockout year and they made it to the second round. But since then, I mean if you kind of toss out that improbable incredible run, I mean this has been a pretty bad team, but it has some pretty good pieces. and some diamonds in the rough, but it's also a team where, to this point, Eugene Melnick's not a big spender, and he's not in a big market, and the Canadian dollar has been in shambles for the last, for a while now, and why is Ottawa an attractive place to attract free agents?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially with the Canadian dollar tanking, it really does make things more difficult. Sure, there's the glitz and glamour and pressure of being in markets like Toronto and Montreal, but Ottawa, especially with the money being in the issue, it's not an easy place. So I think for them, their smartest thing, which I think is the smartest move for any team that's looking to rebuild, is to, amass draft picks and try to win from within eventually. And it'll be interesting to see. And I know, kind of segueing here a little bit till we get with the Bruins with Claude Julien, who has not been fired yet.
Yeah.
But perhaps that's going to happen. Some will say it's imminent.
Yeah.
Who knows? I think he would be a very good fit there, especially because the Canadians are perhaps foolishly holding on to their to the everything with them. I mean, look, Bergevin and Therrien, I think, should be in hot water, to be quite honest. But it is what it is up there. But I think, do you agree with that Claude Julien, if he does get fired, which who knows, I think he'd be a very good fit in Ottawa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for knowing he knows the division. If first off, he's a good, solid, structurally sound coach in a lot of cases. It feels like, and I wasn't high on the Bruins at all this season. I'm not surprised they missed the playoffs for a number of reasons. If you look at what their possession numbers were this year, if you look at what their PDO was and the goaltender, Tuukka Rask was very good this year in large swaths. But you just wondered what their front office was doing last offseason, through the summer, through the draft. There just were a lot of curious decisions they made, and now there are a lot of big decisions they have to make with the prospect of losing Brad Marchand and losing Louis Eriksson potentially. They probably only will try to sign one of them. And Dave, you talk about a reset button. Zdeno Chara is obviously up there in age. They've been dealing with the same. It's the same core, basically, that won them the cup. Obviously, if you toss out Tim Thomas, because Tim Thomas and Tuukka Rask kind of shared goaltending duties for a few years in there. Rask was the goalie in 10 when they got knocked out by the Flyers, and Thomas was the goalie, obviously took them to the cup in 11. But Rask obviously not being the issue, he took them to the finals in 2013, and it's pretty much a similar cast that had them in that series, just a few years older. And sometimes the coach pays for the sins of his players. More often than not, the coach pays for the sins of his players, and he paying for the sins of his front office, because they accrued a ton of they accrued 3 consecutive draft picks, and they were off the beaten path picks that didn't pan out. Haven't panned out this year, and may not down the road. So. Strange times in Boston. They got some great contributions in some past seasons from some unique places, but that Dougie Hamilton trade, still to me, trading him and then re-signing Adam McQuaid just was curious, and their offseason was curious. And Dave, like I said, they have a lot of questions to be answered this offseason, and that stretch run where they won 4 of 14 games.
They lost 4 games down the stretch to non-playoff teams. That's a telling fact right there.
Yeah, but also that they played over their heads for the vast majority of the season, and so and they didn't play well enough at home. Ultimately, was their undoing this season. But you almost get that sense, Dave, that the Bruins are in. This is 2 years in a row they've missed the playoffs. And not just miss the playoffs, but miss the playoffs in catastrophic fashion. And you just wonder if I like Claude Julien. He's a stand-up guy. They had so much. It's amazing though, because how that happens in this league, where he set the record for, or he set a record for wins. I think in the franchise history in terms of coaching, and then now he's probably going to get fired. So. It's just, to me, it's more in terms of Boston and what they're trying to do. They almost look like the Senators in some regard, in that their management is making these decisions that are not necessarily good decisions, and that's how things go south. in the NHL. I mean, every team's very close, and it's, if your management makes a bad decision or a couple bad decisions, and you let a guy like Dougie Hamilton go, you trade him, or and then the decision is Adam McQuaid over Dougie Hamilton. That's not a good decision.
Yeah, especially because you look at Dougie Hamilton, and I think his style of play really fit the East better than the West, to be honest. I don't know how he really didn't fit. There's still time for him, and whatever. I don't want to get too far into that, but that certainly seems like a trade they lost. But one more quick point here before we go on to making our playoff picks, because let's be honest, that's a lot more fun than talking about the culling here. Just real quick, Don Maloney out in Arizona. They're going to keep Dave Tippett, which is probably the smartest decision you could possibly make. I've said it before. I think he's a great coach, but Maloney, I know you kind of pinpointed it to one thing, Pat. That was the reason why he's out right now.
I get the vibe that. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. Probably Shane Doan not trading him is one part, but I just think that part of it has something to do with this Jared Tenorti for John Scott trade, and it just only because. Not because of trading Scott and all that controversy and all that stuff, but like when you talk about what they got back, they supposedly got Tenorti back, and there was a lot of controversy. Everybody thought the controversy of that deal surrounded John Scott, but it wasn't. It was Jared Tenorti who was subsequently fired. Not fired. He was suspended for drugs, and it's interesting though because you think about all the moves that he made. He brought in he brought Anthony Duclair in Keith Yandle trade, and got some good pieces in terms of that. But it just felt like that thing with Tenorti and Scott was kind of the undoing, where you brought in a player, a prospect, potentially for a fresh start. And then, it comes out that Mark Bergevin knew he was going to be suspended. And then you brought him in. You acquired that guy who's going to be suspended, who's not doing anything for that. So there's a PR thing. I'm also reading that there's a lot of problems with his management style in terms of, just in terms of managing. And I think, Dave, the perception is that Dave Tippett is probably among the world's, the NHL's best coaches, and if not the best, maybe him, maybe Mike Babcock. They're all in the same category in terms of what they get out of their players and how they manage people and how they, I've spoken with Dave Tippett. He's not a real vocal guy. He's not a real verbal guy, but he seems to know when to crack the whip, and he seems to know when to comfort guys and to let a guy like that go, especially in the middle of a rebuild where they're probably a year or two away from competing, probably 2 years away from really competing. Yeah, that just would be to get a new voice. Then, I mean, especially for Tippett, who's been so good and so loyal through this whole process, you got to think that they'll do that would be a mistake to fire him.
Agreed. All right, so Pat, we're done with all the bookkeeping, as I like to call it. Now we get to have some fun.
Yeah, let's do that. So where do you want to start, Dave? What series to you is most compelling?
I know, and you're going to even think my pick is more compelling. Blues versus Chicago Blackhawks, which the Blues finished with the third best record, most points in hockey, and they get a great consolation prize.
Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, this series to me is absolutely fascinating because you have the immovable object, which is the Chicago Blackhawks against a Blues team that has a lot of talent but hasn't figured it out. But something to me, though, I don't know if it's just look. Chicago on paper is still very good. They haven't won it back-to-back, though. They've had a year in between, and I think maybe it is because of what it takes, how much it takes to get to that, get to play in June. I kind of like St. Louis in this series. I actually picked them.
The Blackhawks have played hockey in June 3 seasons in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, and I kind of pointed to this, it's interesting because they made the big splash with Ladd and they tinkered with their defense a little bit. Corey Crawford's been in and out of the lineup. And they're actually, the Blackhawks, if you look at it, have been pretty good to close the season. I think they've won something like four out of, they blew a 3-0 lead in Columbus on their final game, which, it's like the week 17 in the NFL, right? These last games of the season, because you never know who's playing. You can't really put a lot into that, but they haven't been particularly good since the trade deadline. But they got points in their last 5 games. 4 of those games were against non-playoff opponents. But Dave, I'm with you. I think I'm going to take St. Louis in this series only because the fatigue factor of Chicago. I think this is a time for St. Louis, and St. Louis, for whatever reason, has looked really good in the season series. They went 3-1-1.
Mm-hmm.
Against the Blues. Now, let's caveat that by saying the 3 wins the Blues got against Chicago were all in extra time. So 2 OT wins and a shootout win. So, there's not going to be 3-on-3 in the playoffs. There's not going to be a shootout in the playoffs. So there's, these teams are as close as you can be, really, I would say. I know that Chicago has been the kryptonite for St. Louis in the past, particularly 2 seasons ago in the infamous Wakey Wakey series, which I think I'm going to stick with St. Louis though, only because you hear teams that have gone on deep playoff runs over and over and over again, and you saw it last year with LA, where they get that fatigue factor. And, you play, nobody's played more playoff games since 2010 than Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. I think they both have played the same number, but I'm not 100% on that. But I just think this is St. Louis's opportunity to rise to the occasion, and they've been really good all year. And the question's going to be obviously with the goaltending, but I think I'm going to pick St. Louis too. Probably 7 games.
I actually have them in 6. I think if they're going to get it done, it's going to be then. But
they get the home game in the game 7 too. Is why.
I just feel like if it gets to game 7 with them, they'll find a way to lose it. Sometimes you see I think if they're going to get up in the series and they're going to give them a series, they'll be able to skate with them anywhere. The thing about St. Louis, and even to kind of dissect it, of course, the Chicago Blackhawks have an edge in terms of what their top 6 is, though St. Louis certainly isn't bad. Tarasenko was firing them late in the year. But if you look at it defensively, that I think St. Louis, their top 4 is better. I mean, there's a question mark for who's the 4th defenseman right now on the Chicago Blackhawks. Is it Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who's been iffy at best at times this year?
Duncan Keith's going to miss game 1, 2 with the suspension, too, is a big thing. So, I mean, that's a defending Conn Smythe winner who carried them last year. I mean, they've performed, like I said, admirably without him. They got points in those 5 games after that loss to Minnesota in the game where he hit Charlie Coyle. But I think and Chicago's depth offensively is really good, and Corey Crawford's shown. The problem I think I have is that last year Crawford really faltered on that first round stage, and Nashville didn't have the offensive horses to make them pay with Scott Darling. If that happens again, you have to think St. Louis is good enough to limit. When you look at the guys like Tarasenko, and you look at the guys like Steen, and you look at Tarasenko 40-goal season, and you look at back. I mean, and plus you have to think that they're playing for their coach, right? Because if they go out in the first round again, you have to think this will be it for St. Louis. I really like St. Louis in this series. I think I might regret it for sure because it's not smart to pick against the Chicago Blackhawks this time of the year, especially with a team like St. Louis who can get that deer in headlights look. I'm gonna take St. Louis though.
Yeah, I agree. I picked Chicago to win it last year, and I got it right. So I'm like, do I go back to it? But it's nothing against Chicago. I don't want this to be that. I don't think that they're playing well, or none of that. I just think it's sometimes. look, you don't win every year. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't anymore. And I think that the hungrier team is St. Louis. And sometimes that matters. And sometimes, hunting pucks and just the sheer desire to do the little things to win, that comes from wanting to win a cup more. And I'm not saying that Chicago doesn't want to win the cup, but there's a team that's hungrier for sure in this series.
Especially when they're as close as they are. Right?
Yes.
Like it's skill level. They're comps basically. So all right, we're both agreeing on St. Louis. Dave, let's stay in the Central, go Dallas and Minnesota. Dallas, which finished with the most points in the Western Conference. Dave, tell me you had that before the season started. And Minnesota, who finished the season very strong. And by the way, has been a 4 seed 2 consecutive seasons and pulled off the upset. Dave, who do you like in that series?
I like Dallas in 5.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think Minnesota really has the horses. Goaltending for them hasn't been as good as it was last year. That is, not that Devin Dubnyk was great against St. Louis in that series last year. He wasn't.
No.
But at least it kind of carried them there. I just look at Minnesota, and we've talked a lot about them. This is a team that's they're reaching their peak, which is, their peak is right where they are right now. I don't think that there's much room for them to get better. Dallas, as much as you could say about Dallas, that can they play, the rough and tumble style of the West? Can they play playoff style hockey? I think that they'll be able to figure it out. Not to mention, if there's any way for them to get their feet wet, this is a good series for it, because I think they're head and shoulders above Minnesota in terms of overall talent.
Yeah, no, I think Dallas has kind of emerged, and I keep coming back to this point, and there's only one real glaring difference, and it's a big one though. That Dallas to me reminds me of Tampa Bay last year in a lot of ways, where they have this emerging crop of young players where they tasted a little bit of success in recent memory, and then were just smashed back to earth there a little bit. But they kind of, 2 years ago, they played Anaheim very tough in a playoff series, in a 6-game playoff series that was decided. I think there were a couple overtime games that were the difference in that series. But, guys like Ben and guys like, Sagan, they all got that taste. And I think, Jim Nill loaded up with Jason Spezza after that season. And to give more offensive depth, but also to give that kind of shutdown element. And so I keep coming back to that point where, they have it. You talk about hungry. They have it turned on in this season. They've dominated the Wild. They've dominated the Blackhawks. They played very well against Los Angeles in some big games. And the obvious difference between this Stars team and last year's Tampa team is the goaltending. And Niemi's not been great, and Niemi and Lehtinen have basically split the games. You have to think Niemi's going to go in there as a starter, but the two of them are basically .905 goalies, which is not good. It's not good enough. Probably won't be good enough for them to get through the postseason. But Niemi's won the cup before, and he's been almost in that Corey Crawford. Obviously he did it with Chicago, so in that Corey Crawford type vein where he was good enough to do it. And they're going to get Tyler Seguin back, it sounds like, for game 1, which would be a huge lift for that team. They can roll their 4 lines. Some of the moves they've made during the season where I say they rid themselves of Ryan Garbett, but Ryan Garbett's been pretty good in Anaheim. But I like their defense with the top pair, Goligoski, Klingberg. Klingberg is a weapon offensively on their power play at even strength both ways. Goligoski, the shutdown guy, playoff experience from years in Pittsburgh. They have 2 lines that can really score if you put Sharp back with Spezza instead of the super line, or and Nichushkin. They have some guys down on the bottom of their lineup who have produced offensively a little bit. I really like Dallas. Like I said, I think they could go all the way to the Cup Finals. I don't know if they could win the Cup, but I think they could at least go to the Cup Finals. I think I would take them to go to the Western Finals, and I think they're going to win the series, probably 5 games over Minnesota.
Yeah, that's what I said is 5. And, I do have my questions about them being able to play that kind of series. But here's the thing, though. Assuming they win and they get St. Louis, I think St. Louis, they're both kind of in uncharted waters at that point for
sure.
Those teams. So I almost look at it and say that it's a wash. That who's to say that Dallas can't dictate the style of play? Chicago, really struggles with them. I know in the playoffs it's different, and that kind of thing. And Chicago is better at playing that heavy style than anyone really, but Dallas has absolutely owned them this year.
Yep.
Their speed is just too much for them. And you have to wonder, as much as we talk about the West as this style of play, is Dallas good enough that they can say, we're going to play our style. We're going to do it how we want to do it. And we're going to win doing it. And I really think that's going to be a fascinating thing to see, because there's enough talent on this team that, sure, they're still, they still have some young pieces that are getting there, but I don't know. I could see them making a really deep run.
Yeah, winning a couple games 6-4 or 7-4 or 7-5. Some of all those 80s style scores.
Hey, why not?
Yeah, no, I could see it for sure. But I agree with you. I think, like I said, the thing with Dallas and Chicago to me is big, and they played really well against St. Louis too. So. Yeah. I think Dallas is not a dark horse. It can't really be a dark horse when you have the most points in the conference, but probably to come out. Plus, they drive play. If you look at their advanced metrics, you could say that Colorado had a 112-point season, right, 2 years ago, but Dallas drives play. They have they get in on that forecheck. They're hard enough to play against, and then they have the speed. And I think if the goaltending holds up is the only question mark. And again, it's a big one. So
yeah.
But I think Dallas for sure. Pacific, Dave. We have a Central Division team in the Pacific Division. As 5 Central Division teams. No surprise, made it. We'll go Anaheim and Nashville. Anaheim somehow, Dave, won the Pacific Division with 103 points. Despite being left for dead right before the Christmas break. Nashville, which is playing pretty well going into postseason too. You love Roman Josi. You love the defenseman they have down there. But Dave, who do you like, Ducks or Preds?
I'm going to say the Ducks. Just because I think that they have been playing really, really good hockey for a while now. They've righted the ship. If you talk about, it's funny how the one bracket is one way and this bracket is, all right, we want to talk about heavy hockey. Yeah. The Anaheim Ducks, they're like wolves sometimes. They swarm the puck in every zone. If you give up a rebound, they're scoring on it. That's what that team is, and they are built to play that style. They can come at you. Ricard Raquel having a good season. Look at him becoming, a really big contributor to this team. I think the Ducks, for whatever ailed them earlier, I don't think you really should hold them to what that was earlier. I really want to look at them in terms of what they've done recently, since the calendar turned. Yeah. And look, Nashville's a good team too. They are. The goaltending has been a little bit better. Rene seems to kind of maybe have figured it out. I like them defensively. I don't think they're as deep offensively. Would I be surprised if Nashville gave them a series or one? No, but I have to go Ducks in 6 here.
I think I would do the same. Don't get me wrong. I think the Ducks are going to find a way to grind out a 6 because it's not playing Nashville is not fun by any stretch. Just ask the Blackhawks about it last year. There was a 3 overtime game that Chicago won. I know there was at least another overtime game they won. I know that like I said, they chased Crawford from the series, and Darling was the difference. The difference to me, Dave, is that Anaheim's goaltending is fantastic. You look at John Gibson and now Freddie Anderson. Pitched a shutout. I know, again, no Ovechkin in that game, but pitched a shutout in his first game back in the finale in Washington. So they have that two-headed monster. And Gibson is playoff tested too. He had that series a couple of years ago against the Kings where he almost carried them to the Game 7. Dave, I don't think they're going to have I think it's going to be like I said, grind out series. It's not going to be as easy as last year's first round series was for Anaheim by any stretch of the imagination. The Ducks cakewalked to the conference finals last year, and it's not going to happen that way again this year. But you just get this. Their superior team. They found it. I think what we haven't talked about, Dave, is to me, which is amazing, is the bond that Getzlaf and David Perron have formed. Perron had 20 points in 28 games since the trade with Pittsburgh that brought him over for Carl Hagelin. That trade benefited both teams.
Yeah, it really did.
Jamie McGinn has been a force in the middle of for their third line. He had 12 points in 21 games since the trade with Colorado. And I think, Dave, that you're going to see some of those fourth line players for Anaheim be difference makers, third and fourth. Some of those Andrew Cogliano types, the Jakob Silverberg types. Like you said, Ricard Raquel. They have this incredible depth up and down their lineup and then Ryan Kessler still to shut down. I don't think, like you said, Nashville does not have the offense. I think it could be 5 games. I think it could be 6. I don't think it'll go 7. But I think Anaheim will win. And you know what that'll set up? That'll set up an epic battle against the winner of the other first-round playoff series in the Pacific. Dave, we watched it in the first round 2 years ago. We watched the Sharks just roll the Kings for 3 games. And then we watched the Zombies rise from the dead. And
I'm so excited for this series. I can't even explain it. Oh, I loved it. I love when these two teams play. It's fantastic.
Peter DeBoer versus Daryl Sutter again in a rematch of the 2012 Cup Finals.
Yeah.
Sutter got the better of him the first time, Dave. What makes you think that it won't happen again?
I wanted to pick the Sharks. I was trying to find reasons. I'm going through statistics. I'm just looking at things, and I go, I can't do it. As much as to me, the biggest thing is I think it starts with the goaltending. Mm-hmm. That maybe Martin Jones in 2 months we're going to say is like the next great thing. It could possibly happen. But looking at what we've seen from him, I think the edge with Quick and net, can we really expect Martin Jones to outplay Jonathan Quick enough within a 7-game series to be the difference maker? I mean,
yeah.
Maybe it comes down to more than that. I mean, the Sharks aren't as good defensively as the Kings are, probably. I don't know. To me, I just think it's all about the Kings. I watched the Kings the other day against I think it was Calgary. They were down a goal. They had not played very well that night. And there's a minute left, and the Kings just do what they normally do, and they flip the switch when it matters. And you literally see the moment that they throw Dustin Brown out there, and he wins a puck in the corner. And then from that point on, the Kings possessed the puck until they scored the tying goal, and they scored an overtime winner. And you think, yeah, I know it's against Calgary, but you look at it and you just see the Kings that when they're motivated to play, maybe they hit a lull here because they know what it takes. But I think them struggling, I'm not so worried about it. That they kind of fell to this 2 seed here. I think the Kings could get as hot as anyone right now. I think I have to go Kings in 6.
You want me to make a case for the Sharks?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear one, but
first things first, and this, there's not a lot of stock you can put in it, but the Sharks got points in 4 out of 5, won 3 of them, looked dominant in a couple of them. Here's where I think maybe the Sharks have an edge. They're the 3 seed, right? So they're going to play 4 road games at Staples Center. They've won both road games at Staples Center this year, and they won more road games than any other NHL team. They won 28 of their 41 road games this season, and it just could not find ways to win games at home is the crazy thing to me. Dave, I think they can match up against LA. I think, they had that kind of we let them off the hook moment a couple of years ago where, they should have probably found a way. And here's the thing. I agree with you that, the Kings let go of Martin Jones for a reason, but you could almost see him, being more motivated to play well against his former team and to show that was a mistake there. And Dave, lest we forget that Peter DeBoer, his first year in New Jersey, took the Devils to the Stanley Cup final. Stunned Florida in the first round, blasted Philly in the second round, and then beat the President's Trophy winning Rangers in a series that Devils fans remember forever. Well, both sides probably remember forever. And then went to the Cup Finals and lost to the Kings. Dave, you get the sense maybe that Peter DeBoer might might have learned from playing that series against the Kings, from playing against Daryl Sutter, from maybe he can say, hey, I know I can beat them. I know how to beat them. Dave, lest we forget, this is still a Sharks team with 3 talented lines and a shutdown guy in Vlasic, and arguably the best offensive defenseman in Brent Burns. Mm-hmm. And Joel Ward is a heavy player, played in a heavy system in Washington, and
I even think Jonas Donskoy has been pretty good.
Been fantastic. I liked him a lot, and they have some pedigree there with Paul Martin. but I'm going to take the Kings in 7.
Yeah, I know. It's really, I really wanted to pick the Sharks. I really did. I think we're on the same boat with this one. But I think when it comes down to it, yeah, I can't wait to watch these games. I don't know.
No, the games are going to be fantastic. I think it's absolutely a 7-game series, Dave. It's just the Sharks have had the Kings so many times. Basically dating back to that 13 playoff year, which also was a 7-game series. Dave, if you remember, I don't know if you do, Game 2 of Sharks Kings in, I think it was the second round 3 years ago, 13. The Sharks had a 1-goal lead with less than a minute left, took 2 penalties, including a puck over the glass, gave up 2 goals in like 17 seconds, or 2 goals in like 20 seconds, and the Kings won in regulation. And the Kings won the series in 7. And those are the type of moments that you can't pick against the Kings until I watch the Sharks or I watch any team eliminate them, but besides the Blackhawks. I can't pick, it's the same reason why everybody said they were taking the Kings to win it all last year. Until they were eliminated from postseason, nobody would believe it until they watched it happen. And they don't make it easy on themselves. What, Dave? I think something like 4 of their last 5 series, or maybe more. Mm-hmm. 4 of their last 5 series wins, or 5 of their last 6 series wins have been 7 games.
Yeah, I picked it in 6, and the more I think about it, it's probably going to go 7. It's probably going to.
Yeah, so like I said, I think it's 5 of their last since they won the Cup in 2012. They won 2 7-game series. Or they won a 7-game series with the Sharks in 13. They won 3 7-game series en route to the Cup in 14. So it's not going to be easy, but I just think, I think it's going to be a great series. But I think I would take the Kings in 7.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating one. All right, so let's move out east now, where I think things get really interesting because injuries really come into play.
Yeah.
Every team has injuries, some worse than others. The Pittsburgh Rangers series is probably going to be decided, but we'll get to that one in a second. But why don't we start with the Atlantic first? Just
okay.
Why not? I feel like that we'll save the Metro for the end here.
Well, Dave, let's start with let's start with this. How about this? The last time the New York Islanders won a playoff series was 1993, right? We all know that. Mm-hmm. The last time they won a series was they stunned the Penguins in a 7-game series on a goal by David Volek in overtime, right? We all know that. You know who was on that team, that Penguins team?
It was probably still Jaromir Jagr, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, precisely. So 23 years later, do things flip? Does the script flip for Florida? For the Islanders? And let's not forget, Dave, by the way, that Florida has gone 20 years without winning a playoff series as well, since the year of the Rat, of course. And in that series, they stunned an upstart Penguins team that had Jaromir Jagr on it. So something's going to have to give there with this series with the Panthers and Islanders, Dave. The Panthers won 2 out of 3. One was in a shootout. They blew the third game. They blew a 2-0 lead in the third period late and lost in regulation 3-2. Like I said, something's got to give here, Dave. One of the teams is going to go snap a 2-decade-long playoff drought. Which team is it going to be?
I think I'm going to have to pick the Panthers in this one. And it's funny because I go against my moniker here of the teams need to learn how to win in the playoffs. But I think this team is different because of the veteran leadership they have. They have the defense. They have Campbell, who's been there for so many years. Yeah, they have a guy like Jagr, even Jokinen. Jokinen, and then they have a guy in Luongo who hasn't won a cup, but certainly won gold medals and been there in big games before. Yep. And I think he's a calming factor just because he's such a relaxed guy, all things considered. I think this team is different. I think when we look at it, this certainly is just the beginning of their resurgence because they're really going to be a good team moving forward. But I think having these veterans there makes them more dangerous than a team that would normally be, at the beginning of their run with a bunch of young guys and that's it. So I think that the experience factor will be there on top of just the young guys learning to cut their teeth in the playoffs. And look, I don't know. In goal, Rice, really? I'm not sure. And losing Hamonic hurts them. That's a really big blow for the Islanders. Lee now is out. I don't know. The Islanders have they were a deep team, especially offensively, the Islanders, but they've kind of taken some hits now, and part of me wants to say that the Islanders can get it done, but I'm going to go Florida here.
I'm going to take Florida also, and I'm going to take it for a reason that doesn't make a lot of sense, but might. I agree with you with the injuries. The Islanders' Greiss has been a revelation this year, but he's not a starting goaltender, and he hasn't played like one. They've been going with Christopher Gibson, and they've been going with JF Berube, and they're trying to just find something here. Dave, everybody wanted to play the Panthers. The Islanders wanted to play the Panthers. The Rangers wanted to play the Panthers. Every team in that wanted to fall to the wild card to play the Panthers. Dave, there's some bit of karma to that, isn't there? That. Mm-hmm. That be careful what you wish for. All these Islander fans are all so ecstatic that they lost that last game to get the Panthers. And, they're going to see what playing the Panthers is like. It's not fun. There's Vincent Trocheck's having a phenomenal year. And Yager, just is the lifeblood of that team. But also his line mates, Huberdeau had a resurgent year.
He's having a really nice year. I think we were kind of down on him earlier in the year. And he's really stepped it up. I mean, they're a deep team.
Yeah, and Barkov, and centering that line, and a lot, like you said, a lot of young players. Dave, I think that learning to win before you can learn to lose, it doesn't have to necessarily happen in the first round either, because you look at the championship teams that have gone through the old Red Wings and the old Devils, and say the Penguins, they lost some late round series. They lost some. The Penguins lost the Cup final. The Red Wings lost the conference final before they went on their big run. The Blackhawks lost in the conference final. I believe it was 2009. They lost in the conference final to the Red Wings. So, I mean, to learn how to lose before you can win, you can get through to those conference finals before you can get through that first round before you have to, quote unquote, learn how to win. So I'm going to take Florida. I think I'm going to take them in 6 games. I think the only chance the Islanders have is if, like you said, their offensive depth is good. I think somehow they're going to have to find out. I mean, if their penalty kill can be a big difference maker, because they were very good in terms of PK all year. Panthers were not very good on the power play. That could be a motive. What I think the big X factor, Dave, and I keep coming back to this, the crowds at the Coliseum were difference makers. Each of the last 2 Islander trips to the postseason. Mm-hmm. What's the crowd at Barclays Center going to be like?
Not much.
That's the thing. Is because you taught. I mean, I attended some of those games and I watched most of them on TV, and you could hear the thunderous ovations and the roar of the crowd, and they were into it from the get-go. The "Let's Go Islanders" chants and the tailgating, even for noon starts. They were noon starts in a couple of those series, and the crowds were incredible. And you just wonder how. I mean, and it carried them in a lot of those games. And you just wonder whether or not it's going to be the same way in Brooklyn, and I don't think it can be. It doesn't, which may not matter to anybody, but I also think Florida's a superior team. I would take Florida probably 5 or 6. I don't think it'll go 7, but I think it'll probably be 5. I think it'd be. I'm tempted to say 5.
Yeah, I think if the Islanders were healthy, I would probably pick. Might have even picked the Islanders.
Yep.
But I also think they might not have fallen into this game if they were healthy.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes hand in hand. But
costing us all that Rangers.
Yeah. We've been agreeing on too many of these. So let's maybe go to a series here that we might not agree on. Tampa Bay and Detroit.
I think we're going to agree on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you want to talk about injuries. Holy hell! Let's start with Tampa. No Stamkos, no Strawman potentially. Tyler Johnson. Did you see that dirty hit?
Yeah,
that was awful. But Greg Patter, and really great job by him to really necessary, and you could put it up to it. So I think even with all the injuries, depleted lineup, I think Tampa is going to win.
I'm gonna pick Detroit in this series.
Are you?
Just because Detroit seems to play Tampa Bay well always.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was beating them handedly 2 years ago or giving them a good run last year.
Yep.
I know on paper Tampa Bay is a much better team. But I think if they get smart enough to go to Mrazek and stick with them, I really like Peter Mrazek. I do.
I just don't think Jeff Blashill's got a lot of faith in him right now.
I know his confidence has been shaken, and maybe that'll change after a game 1. But I think here's the thing: Tampa Bay is already banged up.
Yep.
I worry about them being, it happens with the year after the run, the losing run. Also, without Stamkos, that's a big loss. I mean,
sure,
no
doubt.
Maybe this is a good thing for this team in the long run because they're going to learn how to play in the playoffs without him because they're probably not going to have him next year. Yep. Maybe. I don't know. I think they're ripe for the taking. I think if Detroit can find the goaltender, I think they have a really good chance at winning the series. Sure, on paper it doesn't make much sense, but go ahead, Pat.
It sounds like Tyler Johnson's going to be available. So in the triplets, the triplets were the big thing last year. Dave, I think there's a huge distraction with this Pavel Datsyuk stuff too, because and that could kind of seep into the room there a little bit. I mean, plus I think this is a superior Tampa Bay team. I agree with you, Dave, that this is going to be a fast series. This is going to be a remarkably fast series with a ton of skill. Dave, I don't like Detroit's defense at all, really. Is what it boils down to. And I really do like Tampa Bay. I don't know that I like them to go all the way back to the conference finals even this year. But I'm going to take Tampa Bay. I think I'm going to take them in 7. Just the same as last year, but I really was high on Tampa Bay last year. I think I had them in the conference finals at least, and I was right, and they made it all the way further than I thought they were going to. But this Wings team doesn't inspire me. They haven't played well. It's one of those teams, Dave, and we'll get to this when we talk about the Metro too, that feels like they don't belong in the playoffs, and maybe I'll ruse saying that, maybe I'll regret saying that, but it just feels like they were the lesser of the teams. They were the one left, in a seat in the musical chairs game that didn't necessarily that just because there were 8 teams had to make the playoffs, somebody had to get in, right? So I kind of get that vibe with Detroit. They played really well with the young players with Larkin, and they had some of those, but their defense has really been very bad, and their goaltending is a huge question mark. And Dave, you cannot go into a playoff series against a team where you're where you're inferior on paper, and have the goaltending play the way that Mrazek and Howard have played, essentially the last 2 months of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. On paper, it looks like Tampa Bay should run away with the series, but just looking at how they've played against each other, I think it's going to get to a Game 7, and maybe Detroit finds a way. That's my thing. I think it's going 7 regardless. I really do. It's not going to be as easy as it should be for Tampa, even if they do win it.
Yeah, and you're right though too, because they'll get split crowds in Tampa, and all the Detroit fans are down there anyway. The retirees and the snowbirds and whatnot, so they'll buy up the seats there. But I just get the sense that that Tampa is learned how to win and will start winning some of those series that they should. It's one of those things where if this is going to be a team where we all think has staying power and is going to be high on the list of teams that have staying power and are poised to win cups in the coming years, this is a series they should win, and I think they're going to win it.
Yeah, I mean it's true that they have to, if they're going to become that team that we think they are, they have to be the team that, as you said, kind of was the last team to get in and did not necessarily really deserving of a playoff spot. But
now let's close in the Metro, Dave. We got the foregone conclusions, as I've been calling them. The Washington Capitals, 120 points against another team who barely just snuck in. Mm-hmm. Dave, the last time the Capitals won the President's Trophy, they had a 121-point season. We all know how it ended with a 7-game loss to the Canadiens, which, by the way, Dave, prompted the Flyers to go to the Cup Finals, as we all remember. Mm-hmm. Flyers and Caps haven't met in the playoffs in 8 years, and Mike Richards was a pretty profound influence for Philadelphia in that series. Now he's on Washington's side, Dave. Do the Flyers have a chance?
I think they do. I'm not gonna. I won't give my pick yet, but I guess you can kind of figure out I'm going Washington here. At least I think. I think the Flyers do have a good chance. Why? I think their goaltending is a lot better than they get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Mason can play. I mean, he's had 2 very good seasons now. For as much as the moniker of Philadelphia goaltending and even Philadelphia defensemen, all right, even looking at Mason, but with Gostisbehere and what he's done, which we could wax poetically about him for 20 minutes if we wanted. Radko Gudas has been pretty good for them
when he's not getting to doing.
Yeah, of course. Which you never know. I have a feeling we could see a dust up with him here, but I mean. Yeah. They're a deeper team this year than they've been in the past. Sure, their first line is very good. The way I look at it, though, is that I think that anything that the Flyers can do, the Capitals can do at least a little bit better. Yeah. And I think that if the Flyers are playing just about anyone else in this bracket, I might pick them, to be quite honest. I probably would have picked the Flyers over Pittsburgh. And even if you go into the other series there, I think Washington will just have enough. Holtby will be fantastic like usual. But I do think I could see the Flyers getting out to like a 2-0 lead in this series. And Washington having to all of a sudden be like, whoa, wait a second, we've got to right the ship. And then I think that'll be the point where they begin to take off.
People talk about how well Philadelphia played against Washington this year, but it really wasn't that close. Washington won 2 games in regulation. Philly won 2 games in overtime and 1 in a shootout. And I mean, I think what's great about this series is these 2 teams for whatever reason have not played that often in postseason. Though Capitals and Penguins have played a lot more than the Capitals and Flyers, but it seems like every time they play in the playoffs, it's something epic. I agree with you that the Flyers have some depth. They have some strength. They have 2 lines that can come at you, especially considering depending on what Dave Haxall decides to do with Voracek and Braden Shen, it could be a big difference because, if you put Voracek back with Couturier, that line becomes an offensively driven line. If you keep the super line together and drop Shen back with Couturier, it's more of a shutdown line. I think he might choose to employ that Couturier line against the Ovechkin line and see how that goes. I think Washington is very powerful. I think they're very strong. I think the difference in this series is some of those depth guys that have been there and a lot of the experience they drew upon last year, where they won a 7-game series against the Islanders that probably should not have gone 7 games. They let the Islanders kind of hang around in that series, and I think they're going to kind of take care of business here. I think the Caps win it in 6. Like you said, I think they're going to be great games. I think they're going to be phenomenal games. They're going to be, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody do something dirty that kind of creates a villain in the series that could also turn the tide of the series in some regard. I agree with you that I could see Philly winning game 1 and putting a little scare into Washington in game 2, potentially. I think we're going to learn a lot we're obviously going to learn a lot about Washington this playoff round. Mm-hmm. Well, not necessarily this playoff round, but this playoff year. This is going to be a phenomenal learning thing for us.
Absolutely. But here's my question, though. Does the passing of Mr. Snyder now have an impact on the series? Because if you're the Flyers and all you have to do is split of the first 2 games, and you go back home for game 3, and you're going to have all the playoff stuff coming on, and when that video board shows the tribute to him, and they get into the thing, that's going to be a really tough game for the Capitals.
They're going to go bananas. Yeah, you're right. So, and and Philadelphia's home ice is phenomenal anyway. So, but it can be phenomenal when it's up, and when it can go the other way, where you've seen it where the building flips. I mean, it doesn't take much to flip one way back to the other, where the switch flips and things are going badly, and then they score a goal and it goes completely the other direction. Mm-hmm. But if the Capitals play the Capitals finished with 27 road wins this year, second only, like I said, to San Jose. So they know how to play road games. They have personnel to play road games. They have Mike Richards. They have some playoff tested guys, TJ Oshie and Justin Williams and some of these guys have been playoff tested, know how to win huge games, know how to win important games. Niskanen and Orpik, the same guys as last year. And I just, I can't pick against the 120-point President's Trophy winning team in the first round against the against the Flyers. Against this year's Flyers, who, -4 goal differential and had to, just run as hard as they could to get in just get into the field, with 14 overtime losses. I mean, you don't get points for OT losses in postseason. So I have to go. You can't bet. Here's the other thing too, Dave, that Barry Trotz is very aware of. This team hasn't played a meaningful game in 4 months.
That's true.
So and that he's guarding against that. And I heard him talk about it a couple weeks back, and it's almost like, well, you cruise. And he said it was the curse is where they are in the standings, and the blessing is where they are in the standings, because they're very healthy. There's not much injury in terms of their lineup. They've been fresh. Holtby will be fresh. And I think I'd take Washington. I think I'm going to take Washington 7, actually.
Okay, I said 6. Yeah, I could see it going. So I think this is going to be a really tough series for the Capitals. I really do. The Flyers are not going to go away. They're going to find, especially look, if you're the Capitals and you end up in the box, you're gonna make things a lot tougher for yourself, because the Flyers are a very good power play team. Shane Gostisbehere has how many power play goals?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is going to be a tough series. I don't think Philadelphia is going to win, though. I mean, I've seen people picking them. I just think for Washington to lose now after what they've accomplished this year, it would be such an unbelievable fall from grace. I don't think it'll happen. I think Washington in 6.
So the winner of that will get the winner of Penguins and Rangers, Dave. The Rangers have eliminated the Penguins each of the last 2 seasons, with Henrik Lundqvist being the difference in both of those series. Dave, the other thing about that series that's interesting to me is that Carl Hagelin had the series clinching goal in overtime a year ago, and now he's a member of the Penguins. Who do you got, Dave? Pens or Rangers?
I think I have to put this one with a caveat. I think if Marc-Andre Fleury does not get right,
I was gonna say, gotta put that out there. Mm-hmm. Marc-Andre Fleury is questionable for Game 1.
Yeah, and here's the thing about him is that there's a guy on the other side of the ice by the name of Chris Kreider that I'm not saying it'll be intentional, but he likes to find his way to the net. Mm-hmm. You have a goalie who is coming back from a concussion. I wouldn't be surprised to see Fleury enter this series and possibly exit this series as well. And the other thing is, he's so delicate anyway, though he's been very good.
Yeah.
I think Pittsburgh's a better team. I'm going to say that right now. I'm not all that impressed with the Rangers. McDonough was practicing today with the red jersey on.
Yeah, he's not playing Game 1, supposedly.
Yeah, and I think that
Lundqvist is battling sickness is what I also saw.
I think I'm going to go Pittsburgh. I'm going to go Pittsburgh in 7, actually. But I think that the goaltending can, I don't know if this is enough for Hank to stand on his head and win. I don't know. I think they'll need to do more outside of that. I think they're going to need to really score some goals, which they might be able to if the goaltending isn't good for Pittsburgh. But the Penguins have been on such a roll.
Yeah. I think Alain Vigneault knows how to beat the Penguins. And I think Henrik Lundqvist obviously been a big part of that, because we all remember watching him stand on his head in Game 7 in Pittsburgh 2 years ago, while Dan Bylsma and Ray Shero watched their 10 years in Pittsburgh just fly out the window. I like the Penguins in this series too, even without Malkin. I think that's a huge loss. I think Pittsburgh's offensive depth is very good, and Phil Kessel has been a difference maker this year with Hagelin and even with Bonino lately without Malkin. That's almost a better line with Bonino up the middle than, and you can't say that, but
it's been really good lately, though. It really has been.
And Sid's been Sid, and Hornqvist and Kunitz are protected. I think the Rangers' injuries are big, and McDonough being out, and Girardi Girardi being out might be a benefit for a lot of people. But if Lundqvist isn't 100%, sounds like Fleury's okay. Fleury was like you said, was really good in that series last year.
Mm-hmm.
Was not the reason they lost. They lost because of the defensive injury, the injuries on their blue line, really. And they ran out of bodies, basically, is what happened last year. I think there's a Mike Sullivan revenge factor. I think I'm going to take Pittsburgh at 6. And I think the Rangers are going to do a lot of soul searching this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's, I hate picking against the Rangers in this series because they've shown time and time again that they can win this kind of series. But
yeah.
I just wonder, I know it's like Henrik was good this year, but he didn't have a classic Henrik year.
Not the second half, especially. The first half. Really
and
good.
I think there's part of the defense playing in front of him that he just, he had to bail them out too many times.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with McDonough. McDonough's going to play, but he's playing on one hand. So you can't expect him to be all that effective,
Yeah.
Even Girardi will be a little banged up. And I just don't know if this defense is good enough with, even if Malkin is not back or whatever, I still think there's plenty of offense on this team. I think in the end it'll be Pittsburgh's offense that will do enough to turn the tide of the series.
It's interesting, Dave, because we talk about picking upsets and yet we picked all chalk basically through the whole thing here. And
I think St. Louis is an upset of Chicago.
That's what I was just going to say is that you talk about chalk and you talk about picking upsets, and the second seed over the third seed in that regard is an upset. So it's the perception too, is that time of the year, and there's going to be some weird things happen, and you can bet on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised about anything at this point. Pat, just before we get out of here, though, we'll kind of dive into some other stuff next week. But just because it is the beginning here, who's your Stanley Cup final and who's your winner?
Will put me on the spot here. I think I gotta go with LA in the West.
Okay.
And I think I have to go with. I think I gotta go with Washington in the East, because although it wouldn't stun me if it were Pittsburgh either. I think the winner of that second round series is going to go to the Cup final. I think here's what I'll say. I think Florida is going to go to the conference finals in the East. Let's have it this. I think the winner of Florida Islanders is going to go to the conference finals in the East. And Dave, I keep coming back to this, and I'm kind of joking about it, but can you imagine if the Islanders and Rangers were in the conference finals?
Yeah, that would be absolute mayhem. It would be 7 straight home games for the Rangers, but
well, the crowd would matter. I mean, because that's what I keep coming back to. I said for months, everybody who talked to me knows I picked the Islanders to play the Rangers in the first round because it was going to happen, and I was wrong. But wouldn't it be a crazy, interesting twist if that were the case for the conference final? I mean, the Rangers, all they got to do is beat the two teams they beat in the first 2 rounds last year.
Yeah, it's true.
The Islanders, get by the Panthers, and they get an inferior opponent probably in the second round. So here's what I'd say: Washington, LA. I think LA beats San Jose. I think they beat Anaheim. I think they beat Dallas in the conference finals. But I think Dallas and LA go 7. I think Washington, because it's not just chalk, but it's because this is the year. It's just kind of felt like their year all year, and so I'm going to pick Washington and LA. What about you, Dave?
I'm going to go with what I had before the season started, which is Washington and Anaheim. But I'm going to pick Anaheim to win it. I don't know why, but for some reason I see some parallels this year with Washington and just the way that the Carolina Panthers in the NFL were this year, where they get off to this huge lead, they kind of skate through, everything's going right, and then they play. Then they go against a team that's the heaviest, toughest team that they could face, and sometimes that's when it goes south. I don't know. I think, and the Ducks are going to have to make a lot of moves this year too. So I think that's part of it, is that the Ducks, as they're kind of currently constructed, it's going to be very different. They're probably going to have to unload a defenseman and everything. I think this is the kind of last hurrah for the current roster. They're going to have to deal with goaltender probably too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pick the Ducks. I just feel like they already have faced adversity this year, and I like that.
The Bruce Boudreau Bowl at the final again.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, Pat. So I'm sure in a few days we might be really right or really wrong. I think.
We'll be really wrong in some cases, but
I'm sure we will be, no doubt. We'll mess something up here, of course. I mean, I picked Anaheim to lose to Winnipeg last year, so we saw how that went for me.
Yeah, not great. Sweep.
Any last? I mean, I know you asked me the question to start the show, but what series is the most compelling for you?
I mean, I think they all are, to be fair.
Yeah.
But to not cop out. I know you like St. Louis and Chicago a lot. I do too. I think LA and San Jose, to me, that's because I'm so interested in seeing whether San Jose can rise up and be the difference. And because I've watched San Jose play LA in the games they played this year, and San Jose looks like a really good team against LA in a lot of those games. Even from opening night, it was a difference. And in the East, I think I'm most excited to watch Washington and Philly, just because they're old rivals. There's a 24-point difference in standing there. And, I think Washington's going to get by, but there's always that question mark with them, right?
Yeah, there is. And I think that the fact of that Flyer home game.
Yeah, with the Ed Snyder thing. With
so
that
crazy.
Yeah.
That I think they're in for at least a 6 or 7 gamer, just because I can't see them being that sharp over the first 2 games. And the Flyers, I think, are going to win game 3. So they could be in trouble, but we'll see. It's going to be fascinating. It really is going to be.
I'm so excited for it.
Absolutely. All right, Pat. So I'm Dave Turner, along with Pat Pickens, and this was Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. Playoffs are finally here. Enjoy, everybody. Remember to try to talk to your wife or girlfriend a little bit over the next year. Trust me, it'll go a long way. We'll catch you next week.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks a lot.